The lawyer had a folder in his hand before he even got out of the car. That's what told me something was wrong. The second thing was Melissa's smile, not warm, not nervous, but confident, like a woman walking into a meeting she already expected to win. The wedding had been 9 days earlier. 9. I remember thinking that was an unusually short amount of time for a marriage to produce a lawyer. I opened the door before the bell finished ringing. "Good afternoon, Richard," Melissa said. Rehearsed, the lawyer extended his hand. I didn't take it. He lowered it without embarrassment, and that detail stayed with me. People who expect resistance usually prepare for it. "My name is Richard Hale, 68 years old, retired, widowed 6 years. Until that afternoon, I believed my son had married a woman who loved him. I didn't invite them in. We stood on the porch." The lawyer opened his folder. Melissa folded her arms. "We'd like to discuss family assets," she said. "Not my son's assets, not their assets, family assets." I looked past them toward the street, because sometimes the words people choose tell you more than the sentence itself. My late wife had left behind serious wealth. What almost nobody knew, not even my son, only my attorney and accountant, was how much. $90 million. I'd kept that number private for years, told myself it was about privacy. Standing on that porch, I started to understand it might have been something else. Protection, because Melissa wasn't standing there like a newlywed. She was standing there like someone who'd recently learned a piece of information, and whatever she'd learned had sent her straight to my house with a lawyer in tow. "What's this about?" I asked. The lawyer glanced at Melissa before answering. People usually look at whoever's paying them before they speak. "We'd prefer to discuss this privately. You can discuss it right here." Melissa adjusted her purse strap, forced the smile back into place. "We've been reviewing some family planning issues." There it was again, family, not inheritance, not estate, family, and my son wasn't standing beside her. If this were really a family conversation, why wasn't he there? I asked her exactly that. "He's busy," she said, too fast, busy. 9 days married and too busy for a conversation about his own father's money. The lawyer finally opened the folder draft agreements. Nothing signed, nothing official. But the fact that they existed meant somebody had spent time preparing them, and preparation requires intent. "We'd like to discuss future estate planning," he said. I nearly laughed. Future estate planning with a woman who joined this family less than 2 weeks ago. Not illegal, not even improper on paper, just strange, very strange. I ended it there politely, firmly. Any questions about my finances could go through my attorney, nothing else. Melissa's smile dropped just for a second, but I noticed. As their car pulled away, my mind went back to the wedding reception. Not the ceremony, a conversation I'd overheard near the bar, one I hadn't thought about since. Now the lawyer on my porch made it sound very different. I'd been waiting for a club soda when I heard one of Melissa's friends say, "Imagine marrying into that kind of money." The person she was talking to laughed. "How much are we talking?" And her answer stuck with me now in a way it hadn't then. "I don't know exactly." Melissa says it's way more than anyone thinks. At the time, I'd written it off as wedding gossip. Now it felt like a confession nobody knew they'd made. The next morning, I called Ethan. "Did Melissa mention she visited me yesterday?" Silence. Not a long one, just long enough. "Visited you?" That was the response of a man hearing it for the first time. I told him everything, the lawyer, the documents, the words she'd chosen. By the end, he wasn't speaking. Then, "What documents?" I explained again, another silence. Then quieter, "I've never seen any of that paperwork." If he was telling the truth, Melissa hadn't just hidden the visit from me. She'd hidden it from her own husband. That afternoon, I called my attorney and asked him to look into something, quietly, nothing aggressive. Just whether anyone had been making inquiries about my estate. 3 hours later, he called back, and what he told me changed everything. Melissa hadn't made one inquiry. She'd made 6 through 3 different law firms, starting nearly a month before the wedding. 28 days, he said, when I asked him to repeat it. People don't accidentally contact 3 law firms over 4 weeks. That takes planning, purpose. I sat in my study afterward, looking at a photo of my late wife. Claire had been gone 6 years, long enough that the sharpest grief had dulled, not long enough that I'd stopped talking to her picture when something didn't add up. This didn't add up. Not yet. That evening, Ethan showed up unannounced. looking like a man whose marriage had aged him a decade in 9 days. We sat at the kitchen table where he used to do homework, where Claire used to make Sunday pancakes. I showed him the notes from my attorney, the dates, the firms, the pattern. He read them 3 times without defending her and without accusing her. Then he asked if he could stay in the guest room. That question told me more than anything he'd said out loud. Around midnight, I heard him on the back patio, on the phone, voice low but carrying in the quiet house. "Why didn't you tell me?" A pause. "No, that's not what I'm asking." Then nothing. The next morning, he looked 10 years older, coffee in hand, and told me the rest. 3 weeks before the wedding, Melissa had suddenly developed an intense interest in family finances. Not theirs, mine. Questions about trusts, about property, about inheritance. He'd assumed she was just planning ahead. Now he wasn't sure of anything. Then he told me about the folder. The night before, while Melissa was out meeting a friend, he'd used her laptop to print something and stumbled onto a folder labeled *future planning*. Inside it, a subfolder with one word on it. Richard, not family, not estate, just my name. He opened it. Property records, public filings, old business registrations. Archived news articles about a company I'd sold years ago. Photographs of houses I'd owned decades earlier. Someone had spent months building a file on me, not casually, systematically. The strangest part wasn't what was in the folder, it was what wasn't. No plans for their marriage, no shared future. Just me, page after page, document after document. When Ethan confronted her, she said she was simply trying to understand the family's financial future. Reasonable on the surface, except people don't usually hire lawyers and run background research before they ask basic questions. The order of everything was backwards. Research first, lawyers second, marriage third, and only then the visit to my house. That afternoon, Ethan went to speak with her directly. I didn't hear from him again until almost 11 that night. His voice was calm in the way people get calm right after a hard truth lands. She admitted she knew more than she told me. About what? A pause. About your money. What he told me next explained the lawyers, the folder, the timing, all of it. Years earlier, a distant relative of mine had heard rumors at a charity event about the size of Claire's estate. Not facts, rumors, but large enough to spread. Eventually, those rumors reached Melissa through mutual acquaintances, and unlike most people, she hadn't let it go. She'd started digging, property records, filings, old transactions, and by her own admission, she'd spent nearly a year researching my finances before she ever married my son. That detail sat heaviest with me, not the money, the patience. Nobody spends a year quietly investigating someone unless the answer matters to them a great deal. Ethan also learned the lawyer visit had been entirely her idea, not a shared decision. Not family planning. The draft documents were meant to lay early groundwork for future claims on inheritance. Nothing illegal, nothing binding, just positioning. Done as early and as quietly as possible. The paperwork wasn't the real problem. Hiding it from her own husband was. By midnight, Ethan had moved into a hotel, not permanently, just enough distance to think. He called me from the parking lot the next morning. "I don't know what to do." I understood, because this had stopped being about money. Money had simply revealed something underneath it. The real question was trust, and trust is hard to measure once you find out someone's been hiding their motives. Then he told me about the message Melissa had sent him after their fight. One sentence. No apology, no mention of the argument, no mention of the fact that her husband had just walked out. "Have you talked to your dad about updating anything yet?" I read it twice. Not because it was complicated, because it was so completely revealing. Most people after a fight like that worry about the relationship. She worried about paperwork. Over the following 2 weeks, Ethan and Melissa talked several times in person on the phone. Each conversation made things clearer, not better. She kept insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Everything she'd researched was public record. No laws broken. Every defense she offered was about legality. None of them were about honesty. That distinction ended up mattering more than anything else. Eventually, Ethan asked her one question, simple and direct. If his father had been worth $50,000 instead of $90 million, would any of this have happened? She didn't answer right away. The silence answered for her. When he told me about that moment, I felt less anger than I expected, mostly disappointment. because greed rarely announces itself. It shows up dressed as practicality, as planning, as concern, right up until you realize every road somehow leads to the same place. The strange truth is that the 90 million never protected me. The secret did. If Melissa had known the real number from day one, I'd have spent years wondering whether anything about her was genuine. Instead, she answered that question herself, without ever meaning to. By the end of the month, Ethan made a decision that surprised most of the family, though it didn't surprise me. He chose certainty over hope. He filed for an annulment. The marriage had lasted under 2 months. Some relatives thought he was overreacting. A few said Melissa had simply made mistakes and deserved counseling instead of an ending. But Ethan kept coming back to the same point. It wasn't one decision. It was a pattern. The hidden research, the secret law firm inquiries, the porch visit I was never supposed to mention, the folder with my name on it, the conversations he was never meant to overhear. Each piece alone could maybe be explained away. Together, they told one very clear story, and it had started long before the wedding. The annulment itself was quiet. No accusations, no courtroom drama, no family war. Just paperwork, meetings, signatures, the unremarkable ending of something that had barely had time to begin. A few months later, Ethan came over for dinner. We sat out on the patio watching the sun go down, and he finally asked the question everyone had been wondering. "Why didn't you ever tell me how much Mom left you?" I smiled. "Because I wanted you to build your life without that number hanging over it." He nodded, then laughed for the first time in weeks. Turns out that was a pretty good decision. It was, not because it exposed Melissa, because it protected him. Money has a way of attracting certainty from people who haven't earned it. Plans. Expectations. Entitlement, sometimes before the money's even real to them yet. Claire used to say character is easiest to see when nobody thinks there's anything to gain. The older I get, the more I believe she was right. The 90 million is still there, managed the same way it always was. My life hasn't changed much. Ethan's has. A year later, he met someone new, someone kind, someone honest, someone who never once asked about trusts or inheritance or family assets. And that's when I finally understood the smartest decision I ever made wasn't keeping the money a secret. It was teaching my son that trust is worth more than anything attached to a bank account.